At World War One, and we're going to start with the causes for the outbreak of World War One. So I like to use an acronym MAIN, your main causes for World War One. It's an easy way to remember these kind of underlying causes that ultimately led to the outbreak of war. So your M stands for militarism. What we're talking about with militarism is these growing armies throughout Europe. Most of these European powers built up these large standing armies. And because they were in constant competition with each other, they were constantly developing new military technologies and new tactics and had these large standing armies ready to go. Furthermore, most of these European powers already had these elaborate war plans in place. And these war plans included timetables for when they would take over certain territories and how long it would take. And the only thing they were really waiting for was an actual spark to ignite a conflict. But they already had the war kind of planned out. And so Germany's war plan was known as the Schlieffen Plan. And it was focused on quick attacks and swiftly pushing through the Western Front, taking over France quickly, so that then Germany could devote their full attention to Russia. And they figured it would take a while for Russia to be able to mobilize their forces and actually be able to fight. So their plan was, we're going to take out France quickly, knock them out, so then we can devote our full attention to the Eastern Front. And so Germany's plan focused on these quick attacks. France's war plans were also very offensive, focused on fast-moving attacks. But most of these European powers already had these elaborate war plans in place. And so that's the M, growing military powers across Europe. The A is for alliances, and Europe becomes entangled in this web of alliances. And so Germany and Austria-Hungary are going to form a dual alliance in 1879. And Italy is later going to join that alliance to form the Triple Alliance. Now, ultimately, Italy didn't really like Austria-Hungary because Austria-Hungary still controlled territory that Italy kind of laid claim to. And so when the war breaks out, Italy refuses to join Germany and Austria-Hungary. And ultimately, Italy actually switches sides. And they're going to join Britain early on in the war after Britain promises them territorial gains when they won the war. And so that was your Triple Alliance. Then on the flip side, you had the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente was made up of Britain, France, and Russia. And there were many other alliances that kind of stretched across Europe as well, but those are your big two. And so alliances are the reason that what should have been a small conflict between two nations turned into this larger affair, because one by one, all of these other European countries are pulled into the war because of these alliances. The I is for imperialism. And imperialism is really the reason that this becomes a global war. First off, imperialism played a role in that imperialism led to competition between European powers for territory. And as most of Africa and Asia were claimed by powers, what was left was kind of fought over. For example, France and Germany almost went to war over the control of Morocco. And so imperialism led to disputes between European powers. However, imperialism is also the reason that many of these other parts of the world are pulled into the war, because as Europe is pulled into the war, they're going to pull their colonies into the war as well. And so they're going to use their colonies to recruit soldiers. They're going to use their colonies for raw materials. But imperialism is really what makes this a global war. And then the N is for nationalism. And we're going to see growing nationalism throughout Europe. And nationalism played a role kind of in two ways. A, it encouraged ethnic groups to push for self-determination. Minority groups under the control of other nations wanted self-rule. They wanted their own separate state. And so it's going to play a role there, but nationalism also encouraged this very aggressive form of patriotism. And European leaders were encouraged to take risk and be aggressive. In fact, when World War I first broke out, many people were kind of excited because this was an opportunity for their nation to show that they were better than everybody else. Right, so those are your main underlying causes of World War I. All they were waiting for was a spark. And so that spark is going to come in the form of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And so Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne. And Serbia, which was a small nation to the south of Austria-Hungary, was kind of at odds with Austria-Hungary and upset that Austria-Hungary was continuing to expand, and there were Serbian peoples under Austria-Hungary control that didn't want to be under Austria-Hungarian control. And so while Archduke Franz Ferdinand was visiting Sarajevo in the southern parts of Austria-Hungary, he's assassinated by a Serbian terrorist nationalist group called the Black Hand. Gavrilo Princip is going to shoot the Archduke and his wife Sophie, killing both of them. And in response to this assassination, Austria-Hungary basically places a list of impossible demands on Serbia. And when Serbia fails to meet those demands, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Well, now all those alliances come into play because Russia is going to mobilize their army to come to the support of Serbia. When Russia does that, Germany, who is allied with Austria-Hungary, comes to their defense. And then one by one, all these other European countries are pulled into the war as well. When Germany invades Belgium, Britain had an alliance with Belgium, and they're going to enter the war and come to their defense. And so it's because of these alliances that what should have been a small conflict between Austria and Hungary and Serbia turns into this large European war. And then as these European powers are pulled into the war, they pull their colonies into the war, and that's ultimately what turns it into a global conflict.